The darkness came first, thick and absolute, followed by the awareness of warmth pressed against her entire body. Meridia Wyndham opened her eyes to nothing. Pure black surrounded her, close and suffocating, and for a terrifying moment, she couldn't remember where she was or how she'd gotten there. Her head throbbed, her mouth tasted of copper and fear. Then she felt him. A man's body curved around hers in the cramped space, his chest solid against her back, his arm wrapped firmly around her waist. She could feel his breath stirring the loose strands of hair at her temple, slow and measured, deliberately controlled. The scent of sandalwood and gunpowder filled her nostrils. Her bodyguard, Kane Thornwood. Memory crashed back like cold water. The carriage, the road to Aunt Eloise's estate, the thunder of hooves that didn't belong to their horses, shouting, glass shattering. Kane's voice, sharp and commanding, telling her to stay down. Then nothing. She must have fainted, or been struck. Her temple throbbed with dull confirmation. But that didn't explain why she was now pressed against him in what felt like a wooden box barely large enough for one person, let alone two. His hand splayed across her stomach, holding her firmly against him, and his other arm was wedged beneath her head like a pillow. It was improper, scandalous, utterly inappropriate for an employee. And yet her traitorous body registered only safety. The steady drum of his heartbeat against her spine, the coiled strength in the arm that held her, the way he'd positioned himself so that if anyone opened this compartment, they'd have to go through him first. "Well, you're awake." His voice was barely a whisper, lips brushing her ear. "Don't move. Don't speak above a breath. They're still searching." Meridia's heart slammed against her ribs. She could hear it now. Footsteps above them, the creak of floorboards, muffled voices, rough and impatient. "Check the cellar again. Already checked twice. She's not here. Lord Ashworth wants her found. Search until there's nowhere left to search." Lord Ashworth. The name sent ice through her veins. Phineas Ashworth, Viscount of Coldmere. The man who'd courted her with poetry and promises for 3 months before revealing the monster beneath the charm. The man who'd told her, with terrifying calm, that she would marry him whether she wished to or not. The man she'd fled London to escape. Kane's arm tightened almost imperceptibly around her waist. She felt his jaw tense against her hair. In the absolute darkness of their hiding place, every sensation was magnified. The roughness of his wool coat against her cheek, the calluses on the fingers pressed to her stomach, the controlled rage radiating from him like heat. This was not the detached composure of a hired protector. The footsteps passed directly overhead. Dust sifted down through cracks she couldn't see, tickling her nose. Meridia held her breath until her lungs burned. Finally, the sounds retreated. A door slammed, horses whinnied, and hooves clattered away into distance. Neither of them moved. "Give it another minute," Kane breathed. "He may have left men behind." The silence stretched, thick with dust and darkness and something else. Something charged. Meridia became acutely aware of everywhere their bodies touched. The length of his thighs behind hers, the rise and fall of his chest, the whisper of his breath. When he'd arrived at her doorstep a week ago, recommended by her brother's solicitor as the best in the business, she'd expected a brute. A rough man with scarred knuckles and dead eyes who would serve his purpose and fade into the background. Kane Thornwood was none of those things. He moved like water and spoke like a gentleman. His hands were calloused, but elegant. His face could have graced any London ballroom, with sharp cheekbones and eyes the color of winter storms. He called her Miss Wyndham, with a precision that suggested expensive education. And sometimes, when he thought she wasn't looking, she caught him staring at nothing with an expression of such profound grief that it stole her breath. He was a mystery wrapped in silence. and right now he was holding her with fierce protectiveness. "How did you know?" she whispered. "About this compartment?" A pause. Then, "I know a great many things, Miss Wyndham." It wasn't an answer. It was a door closed firmly in her face. Before she could press further, his arm withdrew from her waist. Cool air rushed into the space between them, shockingly cold after his warmth. She heard the scrape of a latch, and pale evening light flooded their hiding place. They were beneath the floorboards of a farmhouse, she realized. The trapdoor opened into a modest kitchen. Kane rose first, unfolding from the compartment with fluid grace that seemed impossible for such cramped quarters. He reached down to help her, his gray eyes sweeping over her face with clinical assessment. "You're bleeding," he said flatly. Her fingers found her temple, came away red. "We need to move," he continued, already scanning the farmhouse windows. "They'll return when they don't find you on the road. I have horses waiting in the barn." "Wait." Meridia grasped his sleeve before he could turn away. "Who are you really, Mr. Thornwood? How did you know this safe house existed? How did you know they were coming before they even crested the hill?" His jaw tightened. For a moment, something flickered behind those storm-gray eyes. Something that looked almost like guilt. "I'm the man keeping you alive," he said quietly. "For now, that's all you need to know." He strode toward the door, leaving her standing in the fading light with blood on her fingers and questions burning in her chest. Questions like why a hired bodyguard carried himself like nobility, and why, for just a moment in the darkness, she could have sworn he'd whispered her Christian name against her hair. The ride through the night was brutal. Kane had secured 2 horses from somewhere. Meridia didn't ask how. She was beginning to understand that asking Kane Thornwood questions was an exercise in elegant deflection. He answered without answering, revealed nothing while appearing forthcoming, and maintained a wall of professional distance that only made her more certain he was hiding something. By the time dawn painted the sky in shades of rose and amber, they'd reached a coaching inn on the outskirts of a village Meridia didn't recognize. "We'll stop here for a few hours," Kane said, helping her dismount. His hands were impersonal, efficient, nothing like the way he'd held her in that hidden compartment. "You need rest, and I need to send word to your family. My brother will be frantic." "Your brother hired me precisely so he wouldn't need to be frantic. He'll trust my judgment." There it was again. That tone, not the deference of a servant, but the quiet authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. The innkeeper was a round woman with sharp eyes, who took one look at Meridia's blood-stained temple and Kane's grim expression, and asked no questions. She simply led them to a private parlor with a fire already crackling, brought warm water and clean linens, and disappeared with a knowing nod. "Sit," Kane commanded, gesturing to a chair by the fire. "Let me see the wound. I can tend it myself. You can't see it yourself. Sit." Meridia sat, too exhausted to argue. The events of the past 12 hours were catching up with her. The terror of the attack, the suffocating darkness of the hiding place, the warmth of his body curved around hers. She needed to stop thinking about that. Kane knelt before her, his movements precise, as he dipped a cloth in warm water and brought it to her temple. His touch was surprisingly gentle, at odds with the hard lines of his face. "It's shallow," he murmured, examining the cut. "Flying glass from the carriage window. You were unconscious before the worst of it. You carried me. You couldn't walk. Into a hiding place you somehow knew existed in an abandoned farmhouse miles from the main road." His hand paused. She watched his jaw work, watched him weigh his words with the care of a man accustomed to keeping secrets. "I've traveled this route before," he said finally. "I make it my business to know safe locations." "Before? When you were doing what?" Exactly." Before I hired you, who were you protecting? Does it matter? It matters to me. His gray eyes lifted to meet hers, and for a moment, the mask slipped. She saw weariness beneath the control, grief beneath the competence, a bone-deep exhaustion that had nothing to do with their sleepless night. Then the mask returned. I've protected people who needed protecting, he said evenly. Some titled, some not. All alive because I kept them that way. That's what matters, Miss Wyndham. That, and nothing else. He finished cleaning her wound and rose, putting deliberate distance between them. But Meridia's mind was racing now, cataloging details she'd dismissed before, the way he held his fork at dinner, like he'd been trained by the finest tutors. The occasional slip into French when he muttered under his breath. The signet ring he wore beneath his glove, thinking she hadn't noticed. Kane Thornwood isn't your real name, is it? He went very still. Everyone in my profession uses, not a pseudonym, your real name, the name you were born with, the name that goes with the crest on that ring you're hiding. The silence that followed was deafening. When he turned to face her, his expression had hardened into something almost frightening. What do you think you know, Miss Wyndham? I think you're not a bodyguard, or not merely a bodyguard. Meridia stood, refusing to be intimidated. I think you're running from something, just like me, and I think you're far more dangerous than you've let on. And if I am, then I deserve to know what kind of man I'm trusting with my life. They stood 3 feet apart, the fire crackling between them. The coaching inn's walls felt suddenly too close, the air too thick. You want the truth? His voice was soft, dangerous. The truth is that your brother hired me because I owed him a debt. The truth is that Phineas Ashworth, the man hunting you, destroyed something precious to me long before he ever set his sights on you. The truth, Miss Wyndham, is that I took this assignment not for money, but for revenge. Meridia's blood chilled. Revenge? Ashworth killed my brother, drove him to debt, then to despair, then to a bullet through his own skull. Kane's hands clenched at his sides. Your brother's solicitor knew I was the one man in England who would never, under any circumstances, let Ashworth claim another victim. But why hide? Why the false name? Something shifted in his expression, something almost vulnerable. Because if Ashworth knew who I really was, he wouldn't just be hunting you. He'd burn down half of England to get to me. He stepped closer, and she caught that scent again, sandalwood and something darker. My real name would put you in more danger than you're already in. I'm already in danger. I deserve to know. The door burst open. Both of them spun. Kane's hand went to the blade at his belt with terrifying speed. But it wasn't Ashworth's men in the doorway. It was a young woman in a traveling cloak, blonde curls escaping from beneath her hood, her face flushed with cold and obvious agitation. She looked at Kane, and her eyes went wide. "Stellan," she breathed. "Oh, thank God. I've been searching everywhere. It's grandmother. She's dying. You have to come home now." Meridia's gaze swung to Kane. Stellan. His jaw was tight. His expression caught between fury and something that looked sickeningly like grief. "Cressida," he said tightly. "You shouldn't be here. I had to find you. No one else knows where you've been. You disappeared for weeks, and now grandmother is asking for you, and—" The young woman's eyes landed on Meridia for the first time. "Who is this?" "No one." "She doesn't look like no one. She looks like a lady." "Cressida." His voice cracked like a whip. "Not now." But Meridia had already put the pieces together. Cressida, grandmother, Stellan. She stared at the man she'd hired as her bodyguard, the man who'd held her in the darkness, the man who'd just confessed to wanting revenge against the monster hunting her. "Your name is Stellan," she said slowly, And you have a grandmother who's dying. And a sister who calls you by a name that isn't Thornwood." Her voice hardened. "Who are you?" The young woman, Cressida, looked between them with dawning horror. "You don't know?" she whispered. "He didn't tell you." "He's the Duke of Ravensholm," Cressida said. "My brother. The man who vanished from society 3 months ago without a word to anyone, except a cryptic note about matters requiring attention." Her voice rose. "Everyone thinks he's dead, or mad, or both. And he's been playing Bodyguard?" The room spun. Duke, Stellan Ashford, Duke of Ravensholm, one of the highest titles in England. A name she'd heard whispered in ballrooms, always accompanied by words like mysterious and tragic and unmarried. And he was standing in front of her in a bodyguard's rough wool coat, with another man's blood still staining his sleeve. "You lied to me," Meridia heard herself say. "This entire time, you lied. I protected you. You manipulated me. You let me believe." She couldn't finish the sentence. "Let me believe you were someone safe. Someone who couldn't complicate my already complicated life. Someone I couldn't fall for. Because she'd felt it, hadn't she? The pull toward him. The way her pulse quickened when he entered a room. The way she'd memorized the planes of his face while pretending not to look. She'd thought it was safe because he was beneath her station. A bodyguard, a servant, someone she could never actually want. But a duke who'd held her in the darkness. A duke with grief in his eyes and revenge in his heart. This was infinitely worse. "Miss Wyndham." He stepped toward her, and she stepped back. His face flickered with something that might have been pain. "Please, let me explain." "Your grandmother is dying," Meridia said, her voice cold. "Your sister just told you. Perhaps you should attend to your family, instead of playing pretend with a woman who apparently knows nothing about the man protecting her. The threat to you is still real. Ashworth is not your concern anymore. Your Grace." The title landed between them like a slap. His jaw tightened. "Like hell he isn't. What happens to me is not your responsibility. What happens to your family clearly is." Meridia turned to Cressida, forcing steadiness into her voice. "Lady Cressida, I apologize for any confusion. Your brother was hired under false pretenses. Our arrangement is concluded." "It is not concluded." Stellan's voice was steel. "You cannot dismiss me." "I just did." "And if you try to travel without protection, Ashworth's men will have you within a day. Is that what you want? To prove a point at the cost of your own life?" She whirled on him, fury and fear, and something dangerously close to heartbreak churning in her chest. "What I want, Your Grace, is one person in my life who doesn't lie to me. One person who sees me as something other than a pawn in their schemes." Her voice cracked despite her efforts. "You used me to get close to Ashworth. You admitted it yourself. This was never about protecting me. It was about your revenge." He flinched like she'd struck him. "Both," he said quietly. "It was both, Meridia." Her Christian name on his lips. No Miss Wyndham, just her name, spoken like a prayer. It cracked something open inside her, something she couldn't afford to feel. "Lady Cressida," she said, not taking her eyes from his. "Is there room in your carriage for an unexpected passenger? I seem to find myself without transport." Cressida looked at her brother, then at Meridia, and her expression shifted to something that might have been respect. "There's room," she said, "and a great deal of explaining to be done, I suspect, on multiple fronts." Stellan's expression shattered, and Meridia walked past him, out of the parlor, refusing to look back. Because if she looked back, she might see what his face revealed. and she wasn't ready to name what she felt in response. The journey to Ashford Manor took 6 hours. 6 hours of sitting across from Lady Cressida, who peppered her with questions between bouts of worried silence. 6 hours of refusing to look out the window at the man riding alongside their carriage, his dark coat a constant presence in her peripheral vision. 6 hours to realize she had nowhere else to go. Aunt Heloise's estate was compromised. Ashworth's men knew the route. Her own townhouse in London was the first place he'd look. Her brother Cedric was traveling abroad and couldn't be reached for weeks. She was alone, hunted, and now inexplicably entangled with a duke and his family. "He's not as terrible as you think," Cressida said somewhere around hour 4. "Stellan, I mean. He's just damaged." "Everyone is damaged, Lady Cressida. That doesn't excuse deception." "No, but it might explain it." Cressida tucked her feet beneath her like a child, all pretense of propriety abandoned. "Our brother Alden died 8 months ago. Aunt Stellan hasn't been the same since. He blames himself, though the fault was entirely Ashworth's. The gambling debts, the blackmail, She stopped, swallowing. Alden shot himself in Stellan's study. Stellan found him. Meridia's chest constricted. "I didn't know." "No one does. We kept it quiet. Scandal, you understand. But Stellan, he became obsessed, investigating Ashworth, gathering evidence, waiting for a way to destroy him. When he heard Ashworth had fixated on a young woman, that he was hunting her." Cressida's eyes met Meridia's. It wasn't just revenge. He wanted to save someone. Because he couldn't save Alden. The carriage rocked over a rut, and Meridia gripped the seat to steady herself. "That doesn't change the fact that he lied." "No, it doesn't." Cressida's voice was gentle. But perhaps it changes how you understand the lie." Ashford Manor rose from the countryside like something out of a dream. Golden stone, climbing ivy, windows that caught the afternoon light and threw it back in fragments of fire. The estate sprawled across manicured grounds, ancient oaks lining the drive, gardens that seemed to stretch endlessly toward the horizon. It was beautiful. It was intimidating. It was not where Meridia belonged. They were greeted by a battalion of servants and a stern-faced housekeeper named Mrs. Pembroke, who took one look at Meridia's travel-worn dress and blood-stained temple, and immediately began issuing orders. "The Rose Guest Chamber for Miss Wyndham. Hot water, fresh linens, a meal sent up. And send for Dr. Hartley. That wound needs proper examination." "I'm quite all right," Meridia protested. "Sure, you'll forgive me, miss, but you look anything but." Mrs. Pembroke's tone brooked no argument. "This way, please." Inside, the house was even more intimidating. Marble floors, soaring ceilings, portraits of stern-faced Ashford ancestors watching from the walls. Meridia felt like a fraud with every step, certain someone would realize she didn't belong and throw her out into the street. Meridia followed, too exhausted to resist. The Rose Guest Chamber turned out to be larger than her entire London apartment, with silk wallpaper, a 4-poster bed draped in velvet, and windows overlooking a garden that made her throat ache with unexpected longing. She didn't belong here. She was a gentleman's daughter of modest means, not a guest in a duke's ancestral home. And yet here she was. A maid named Bertie helped her wash and change into a borrowed dress of pale blue muslin that fit surprisingly well. The cut was fine, the fabric softer than anything Meridia owned. When she caught her reflection in the mirror, she barely recognized herself. She looked like she belonged. The thought was terrifying. A knock at the door interrupted her spiraling thoughts. Meridia expected Mrs. Pembroke, or perhaps Cressida. Instead, Stellan stood in the doorway. He'd changed from his rough traveling clothes into proper attire. Dark coat, white cravat, every inch the Duke he'd been hiding. But his face still held that exhausted grief, and his gray eyes searched hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. "May I come in?" "You shouldn't be in a lady's bedchamber. I shouldn't have done a great many things." And yet, he didn't move from the threshold. "Please, Meridia. 5 minutes. Then you can hate me in peace." Against her better judgment, she stepped aside. He entered, closing the door behind him. They stood in the fading afternoon light, two people who'd shared a hiding place in the dark, now strangers again. "My grandmother is asking to see you," he said. "Me?" "She doesn't know me. She knows you're here. She knows you're the woman I've been protecting. And she's—" He hesitated. "Curious. About the woman you deceived? About the woman who survived an attack by Ashworth's men and still had the composure to dismiss a duke?" The ghost of a smile crossed his face. "She finds that impressive. I don't care what she finds impressive. I shouldn't even be here. No, you shouldn't." He moved closer, and she forced herself not to retreat. "You should be safe at your aunt's estate, living your life, never knowing my name. But Ashworth has made that impossible. His men are everywhere. Your brother is unreachable. Your resources are limited. And you're suggesting what, exactly? Stay here, at Ashford Manor, as a guest, not a prisoner, until we can find a way to neutralize Ashworth permanently." Meridia laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Stay as your guest, after everything that's happened, after you admitted you used me as bait for your revenge." "I admitted I wanted revenge. I never used you as bait." His jaw tightened. "Everything I did was to keep you safe. The hiding place, the safe routes, the constant vigilance. You were never bait, Meridia. You were. You are—" He stopped, struggling for words. It was strange to see him at a loss. In the week she'd known him as Kane Thornwood, he'd always seemed so certain, so controlled. "What am I?" she pressed. "Important." The word came out rough. "More important than revenge. More important than anything." Her heart stuttered. "You don't know me well enough to say that. I know you refused to faint when most women would have. I know you demanded answers when most would have accepted comfortable lies. I know you play chess against yourself because you can't find a worthy opponent. I know you take your tea without sugar because you find sweetness cloying. I know you read philosophy when you should be sleeping and hide it when anyone comes near because you don't want to be seen as pretentious." Meridia stared at him. "You've been watching me. Protecting you requires observation. I noticed. Everything." The confession hung between them, weighted with implication. This wasn't detached surveillance. This was attention, fascination, something that looked dangerously like devotion. "What would this arrangement look like?" she asked carefully. "If I agreed to stay." "You'd be presented as Cressida's friend, a connection from her London season, visiting while I attend to family matters. No scandal, no impropriety. My grandmother will likely interrogate you, but she does that with everyone." "And you?" His expression flickered. "I'll maintain appropriate distance. You've made your feelings about my deception clear. I won't presume." The words should have been a relief. Instead, they felt like a loss. "What about Ashworth? I have evidence against him. Financial records, witness testimony, connections to illegal operations. Enough to destroy him utterly. But building a case takes time, and while I build it, you need protection." His eyes held hers. "Let me protect you, Meridia, properly this time. No lies between us. Just secrets. I'll answer any question you ask. From this moment forward, complete honesty." Meridia weighed her options. They were distressingly limited. She was alone in enemy territory, with no resources, and a predator hunting her. Stellan Ashford was offering her shelter, protection, and the chance to destroy the man who'd made her life a nightmare. The cost was trusting someone who'd already deceived her once. But what choice did she have? 3 conditions, she said. Stellan's eyebrow rose. You're negotiating with me. You need me to play a role. That gives me leverage. She lifted her chin. First, I want word sent to my mother explaining my absence. A proper letter, not rumors. She'll worry herself ill otherwise. Done. Second, when this ends, when Ashworth is dealt with, I want introductions, letters of reference, enough connections to secure a position as a companion or governess somewhere respectable. I won't return to my old life with nothing. He frowned. You're planning your departure before you've even arrived. I'm being realistic. This arrangement is temporary. I won't pretend otherwise. Fine. I'll ensure you have every advantage when you leave. And your third condition? Meridia met his eyes squarely. The moment you decide to pursue a genuine match, whether arranged by your grandmother or otherwise, this ends. I'll find somewhere else to go. I won't be your shield while you court another woman. Something shifted in his expression. Pain, perhaps, or recognition. You think I'm using you to avoid marriage. I think you're a duke with responsibilities you've been avoiding. I think your grandmother is dying, and your sister is frightened, and sooner or later, you'll have to face reality. When you do, I won't be caught in the middle. The silence stretched between them, sharp and fragile. Then Stellan extended his hand. 3 conditions. Agreed. You have my word, Miss Wyndham. Complete honesty, complete respect, and a clean ending when the time comes. Meridia looked at his outstretched hand. Elegant, powerful, marked by calluses that didn't belong to a pampered nobleman. She thought of the darkness, of his arm around her waist, of the whispered name she might have imagined. So she took his hand. His grip was warm and firm, and something electric passed between them at the contact. His eyes darkened slightly, and she knew he felt it too. We have an arrangement, she said. We have an arrangement, he agreed. But as he released her hand, his fingers lingered a moment too long, and when he turned to leave, he paused at the door. For what it's worth, he said quietly, I would never have let Ashworth touch you, revenge or not. From the moment I saw you, you were under my protection, not because of contracts or debts owed to your brother, because... He stopped himself, jaw tightening. Because, Meridia whispered. Because some people are worth protecting regardless of the cost. He left before she could respond. Meridia sank onto the edge of the velvet bed, her pulse racing, her hand still warm where his had gripped it. This was supposed to be a practical arrangement. Protection in exchange for cooperation. A temporary alliance against a common enemy. But the way he'd looked at her just now, the way her heart had responded, nothing about this felt practical. And the most dangerous part was that she couldn't decide if that terrified her or thrilled her. Down the hall, a door closed, and somewhere in this vast, beautiful house that wasn't her home, a dying grandmother waited to judge whether she was worthy. Meridia straightened her spine, smoothed the borrowed dress, and prepared to face whatever came next. She'd survived worse than disapproving dowagers. She just wasn't sure she'd survive the Duke of Ravensholm. Sleep came in fragments, shattered by dreams of darkness and warmth and a voice whispering her name. Meridia woke to pale morning light streaming through silk curtains and the distant sound of birdsong. For a disorienting moment, she didn't know where she was. Then memory returned. The attack, the hiding place, the revelation, the arrangement. She was a guest in a duke's ancestral home, pretending to be someone who belonged. Bertie arrived with breakfast on a silver tray, fresh pastries, and tea, and a soft boiled egg in a porcelain cup painted with roses. More food than Meridia typically ate in an entire day, presented with casual elegance that suggested this was merely standard fare. "His Grace has requested you join the family for luncheon," Bertie said, laying out a selection of day dresses. "Lady Cressida sent these from her own wardrobe. She says you're nearly the same size. That's very generous of her." "Lady Cressida is generous with everyone," Bertie hesitated. "It's been difficult here, miss. Since Lord Alden passed, the house feels quieter, sadder. Lady Cressida tries to keep spirits up, but His Grace—" She trailed off, clearly uncomfortable speaking of her employer. "What about His Grace? He works, all hours, every day. Barely eats, barely sleeps. Mrs. Pembroke says he's trying to outrun something that can't be outrun." Bertie's eyes met Meridia's briefly. "Maybe having a guest will help. Give him something else to think about." Something else. Or someone else. Meridia pushed the thought away. After Bertie left, she dressed in a simple morning gown of cream muslin with delicate embroidery at the sleeves. It fit perfectly, as if made for her. She studied her reflection and saw a stranger, a woman who could pass for gentry, for nobility even, if no one looked too closely. But people always looked closely. She spent the morning exploring Ashford Manor, telling herself it was practical reconnaissance rather than idle curiosity. The house was vast, a labyrinth of corridors and chambers accumulated over generations. Portraits lined the walls, stern-faced Ashfords, staring down through centuries of privilege and power. She found the library first, 3 stories of books rising toward a painted ceiling, depicting some mythological scene she couldn't name. The smell of leather and paper wrapped around her like an embrace. Then the music room, with a grand piano gathering dust beneath a white cloth. Then the gallery, where she paused before a portrait of 3 children, 2 boys and a girl, captured in oils and innocence. Stellan. She recognized him immediately, even at perhaps 12 years old. The same storm-gray eyes, the same sharp jaw. He stood slightly apart from his siblings, one hand on the younger boy's shoulder. Protecting, even then. The younger boy must have been Alden. Blonde where Stellan was dark, with a mischievous smile and eyes that seemed to sparkle even in paint. Dead now, by his own hand. In Stellan's study. Meridia's chest ached. He was the light of this family. She spun. Mrs. Pembroke stood in the doorway, her severe expression softened by something like grief. "Lord Alden," the housekeeper continued, moving to stand beside Meridia. "Always laughing, always getting into scrapes. His Grace would scold him, then bail him out. Every single time. Until he couldn't. Until he couldn't." Mrs. Pembroke's voice hardened. That man, Ashworth, he saw the light in Lord Alden and wanted to snuff it out. Some people are like that. They can't stand brightness, so they destroy it. Is that why His Grace? Meridia hesitated. Is that why he's so determined to destroy Ashworth? His Grace blames himself. If he'd seen the signs sooner? If he'd paid Alden's debts without question? If he'd been home that night instead of attending Parliament? The housekeeper shook her head. "Guilt is a poison, miss, and His Grace has been drinking deep." Meridia thought of Stellan's gray eyes, the grief that lived behind them, the way he'd held her in the darkness with such fierce protectiveness. "The Dowager Duchess wishes to see you," Mrs. Pembroke said, her tone shifting back to business. "After luncheon. She's not well enough to join the family at table, but she insists on meeting you privately. Cressida mentioned she was dying. The doctors give her weeks, perhaps a month." Mrs. Pembroke's jaw tightened. She's held on this long through sheer will, wanting to see His Grace settled before she goes, wanting to know the family will continue. And she thinks I have something to do with that. The housekeeper's expression was unreadable. "The Dowager thinks a great many things, miss. I'd advise you to answer her questions honestly. She has a gift for detecting falsehood." Mrs. Pembroke departed, leaving Meridia alone with the portrait of 3 children who'd once been happy. She touched the gilded frame, tracing the curve of Alden's painted smile. I'm sorry," she whispered to the ghost in oils, "for what happened to you, for what it did to him." The portrait offered no response, but as Meridia turned to leave, something caught her eye. A door she hadn't noticed before, half hidden behind a tapestry. It was slightly ajar, and through the gap, she could see a room beyond. Dark, cluttered. Nothing like the pristine elegance of the rest of the house. She should walk away. It wasn't her place to snoop. But the door beckoned, and Meridia had never been good at ignoring mysteries. She pushed it open and stepped inside. The room was a study, though chaos might have been a better description. Papers covered every surface, pinned to walls, stacked on desks, scattered across the floor. Maps, financial records, newspaper clippings, letters with broken seals. And at the center of it all, connected by strings and pins like a spider's web, was a single name written in bold letters. Phineas Ashworth. Meridia moved closer, her heart pounding. This wasn't just evidence gathering. This was obsession. Months of work, maybe longer, cataloging every sin, every connection, and every weakness. She picked up a letter at random and scanned the contents. Her blood turned to ice. The letter was from her brother, Cedric, dated months earlier, since early spring, discussing her habits, her routine, her vulnerability to a man like Ashworth. Stellan hadn't stumbled into protecting her. He'd been planning it for months. Meridia barely tasted luncheon. She sat at the long mahogany table, pushing food around her plate, while Cressida chattered about the upcoming autumn assembly, and Mrs. Pembroke oversaw the servants with military precision. Stellan was absent, called away to deal with some estate matter, a relief and a frustration in equal measure. The letter burned in her mind, her brother's words, written months before she'd ever heard the name Cain Thornwood. A conspiracy she'd been blind to. Had Cedric known who Stellan really was? Had he deliberately put her in a duke's path? The questions multiplied, and none of the answers were comforting. After the meal, Mrs. Pembroke led her up a winding staircase to the east wing, where the air grew heavier and the light grew dimmer. "The Dowager's chambers," the housekeeper said, pausing before a carved oak door. "Remember what I said, miss. Honesty. She'll know if you lie." Meridia squared her shoulders and entered. The room was surprisingly warm, went up fire blazing despite the mild autumn day. Heavy curtains blocked most of the light, casting everything in shades of amber and shadow. The smell of medicine and lavender hung thick in the air, and in the center of a massive bed, propped against a mountain of pillows, sat the Dowager Duchess of Ravensholm. She was ancient and imperious, white hair swept back from a face that must have been beautiful once and was now simply formidable. Her eyes, the same gray as Stellan's, burned with intelligence and something sharper. "Assessment. Come closer, girl. Let me see you." Meridia approached the bed, fighting the urge to curtsy like a servant. She was a guest here, theoretically an equal. The Dowager's gaze swept over her, missing nothing. The borrowed dress, the healing wound at her temple, the defiance in her stance. "So," the old woman said finally, "you're the one my grandson has been protecting, the one he disappeared for. I didn't ask for his protection, Your Grace." "No? Then how did you come to be in his care?" "My brother arranged it, through a solicitor. I didn't know who he truly was until yesterday." "And when you discovered he was a duke? When you learned he'd deceived you?" Meridia's chin lifted. "I dismissed him. Told him our arrangement was concluded." Something flickered in the Dowager's eyes. Surprise, perhaps, or approval. And yet here you stand, in my house, wearing my granddaughter's dress. I had nowhere else to go. Lord Ashworth's men are hunting me. His Grace offered sanctuary. His Grace. The Dowager's lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. You speak of him so formally, as if he's a stranger. He is a stranger, Your Grace. I've known him a week. A week in which he carried you to safety, held you in hiding while assassins searched, revealed secrets he's kept from his own family. The old woman's voice sharpened. That doesn't sound like strangers to me. Meridia's face heated. He was doing his job. His job is running a duchy, managing Parliament, ensuring the continuation of a lineage that stretches back 400 years. The Dowager leaned forward, her frail body trembling with the effort. He abandoned all of that for you, a girl of no particular fortune or connection. Why do you suppose that is? Revenge against Ashworth. Partly. The Dowager settled back against her pillows, studying Meridia with those piercing eyes. Sit. I'm too old and too tired to crane my neck. Meridia sat in a chair by the bedside, her hands folded tightly in her lap. My grandson is broken, the Dowager said bluntly. Has been since Alden died. He blames himself, of course. That's the Ashford way. We carry guilt like armor, weighing ourselves down until we can barely move. Cressida told me what happened. The gambling debts. The blackmail. Did she tell you what happened the night Alden died? The full truth? Meridia shook her head. The Dowager's gaze grew distant, lost in memory. Stellan was supposed to meet Alden that evening. Alden had sent word that he needed help, that he was in trouble. But there was a vote in Parliament, something Stellan deemed critical. He told Alden to wait, that he'd come the next morning. Her voice cracked. Alden couldn't wait. By the time Stellan arrived, it was done. The words landed like stones. He thinks if he'd gone immediately, he knows if he'd gone immediately, Alden would be alive. The guilt has eaten him from the inside. He stopped attending social functions, stopped caring about the title, the estates, his own future. He focused everything on destroying Ashworth, as if that could bring Alden back. Meridia's throat tightened. I understand wanting revenge. Ashworth terrorized me for months before I fled. Do you? The Dowager's eyes sharpened. Do you understand that revenge consumes? That it burns away everything else until there's nothing left but ash? Then what would you have him do? Forgive? I would have him live. The words came out fierce, raw. I'm dying, girl. Weeks at most. And my greatest fear isn't death. It's leaving him alone, leaving him to waste away in that study, drowning in guilt and schemes, never allowing himself to feel anything again. She reached out, her thin fingers grasping Meridia's hand with surprising strength. You make him feel something. I saw it in his face when he spoke of you, the first spark of life I've seen in months. I'm not. Meridia pulled her hand back. Your Grace, I'm not here to save your grandson. I'm here to survive. Perhaps. But sometimes survival isn't enough. Sometimes we need a reason to survive. The Dowager's expression softened, just slightly. I'm not asking you to love him. I'm not even asking you to forgive his deception. I'm asking you to see him, the man beneath the title, the grief beneath the control. And if I see him, what then? Then perhaps you'll understand why he chose you. So out of all the women Ashworth has threatened, all the people he might have saved, he chose you. The Dowager's eyes held hers. Ask yourself why. The answer might surprise you. Before Meridia could respond, a coughing fit seized the old woman, racking her frail body. Meridia reached for the water glass on the bedside table, holding it to the Dowager's lips until the spasm passed. Thank you, the Dowager whispered, sinking back against the pillows. You have good instincts, girl. kindness without hesitation. Anyone would have done the same. No, they wouldn't. The dowager's eyes drifted closed. Send Mrs. Pembroke. I need to rest. But Meridia. The use of her Christian name startled her. Yes, Your Grace. If you hurt him. The old woman's voice was barely a whisper, but steel ran through it. If you use his affection against him, exploit his vulnerability for your own gain, I will haunt you from beyond the grave. Do we understand each other? The threat should have been absurd, coming from a dying woman in a sickbed. Instead, it was terrifying. We understand each other, Meridia said. She left the chamber, heart pounding, mind reeling. In the corridor, she nearly collided with Stellan. He caught her by the shoulders, steadying her, and for a moment they stood frozen. This close, she could see the shadows beneath his eyes, the tension in his jaw. He looked like a man who hadn't slept in days. You spoke with her, he said. Not a question. She had a great deal to say. About me? Among other things. Meridia stepped back, breaking his hold. Did you know my brother was corresponding with you months before you became my bodyguard? His expression flickered. Guilt. I found the letters, Stellan, in your study. The hidden one, behind the tapestry. You've been planning this from the beginning. Meridia, how long have you known about me? How long have you been watching? The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken truths. Since March, he said finally. Cedric contacted me after Ashworth began his pursuit. He'd heard of my interest in the Viscount. He asked for my help. And you agreed, without ever meeting me. I agreed because Ashworth needed to be stopped, because your brother was desperate, because he stopped, running a hand through his dark hair. Because the more I learned about you, the more I knew I couldn't let him have you. The confession hung between them, raw and dangerous. That should frighten me, Meridia whispered. Does it? She didn't answer. Because the truth was, it didn't frighten her. It thrilled her, and that was far more terrifying. The days that followed blurred into a rhythm Meridia hadn't expected. Mornings were spent with Cressida, who insisted on playing lady's maid, despite having no training and enormous enthusiasm. She dragged Meridia to the village modiste, ordering gowns and accessories with cheerful abandon. You'll need at least 3 evening dresses, Cressida declared, holding fabric samples against Meridia's complexion. The autumn assembly is in 10 days. Everyone will be there. It's our best chance to establish you as my friend from London. I don't need 3 evening dresses for one assembly. Nonsense. You need options. And there's the Thornbury dinner next week, and the Whitmore musical, and Cressida's face lit up. Oh, this deep garnet would be stunning on you. Stellan won't be able to look away. I'm not trying to attract your brother's attention. Cressida's smile turned knowing. Of course not. Afternoons were spent learning the household, memorizing names and relationships, understanding the delicate social web Meridia would need to navigate. Mrs. Pembroke proved an invaluable teacher, her stern exterior hiding a dry wit and sharp intelligence. Lord Thornbury is a gossip. Never tell him anything you wouldn't want repeated at every dinner table in the county. Lady Whitmore is kind, but vague. Her husband has a wandering eye. The Barrington sisters are harmless, unless crossed, and then they're venomous. Meridia absorbed it all, building a mental map of allies and enemies. And through it all, Stellan remained distant. She saw him at meals, where he was polite but formal. Occasionally their paths crossed in the corridors, and he would nod, murmur a greeting, and continue on his way. The intimacy of their earlier conversation seemed forgotten, replaced by careful propriety. It was what she'd asked for. Appropriate distance. So why did it feel like loss? On the 5th evening, Meridia stood before the mirror in her borrowed chamber, wearing one of the new gowns Cressida had commissioned. deep blue silk that caught the candlelight and seemed to shimmer, a modest neckline that somehow emphasized rather than concealed, her dark hair pinned up with pearl-tipped pins, a few curls escaping to frame her face. She looked like someone else, someone who belonged on a duke's arm. "Beautiful," Bertie breathed, making final adjustments to the hem. "You'll turn every head at the assembly." That's what I'm afraid of. Because making a good impression meant playing a role, becoming someone she wasn't, pretending she fit into this world of wealth and privilege when the truth was she'd be gone in weeks, return to her modest life with nothing but references and memories. Because the person in the mirror wasn't really Meridia Wyndham. It was a fiction. A beautiful, dangerous fiction. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. "Miss Wyndham," Mrs. Pembroke's voice. "His Grace requests your presence in the library. There's been news." Meridia gathered her skirts and descended to the library, her heart beating faster than it should. Stellan stood by the fire, a crumpled letter in his fist. His face was pale, his expression devastated. "What's happened?" Meridia asked. "Ashworth." The name came out like a curse. He held up the crumpled paper. "My contact in London sent warning. He knows you're here. Somehow, he's discovered you're at Ashford Manor." The world tilted. How? "I don't know. A spy in the household. Someone in the village who recognized you. It doesn't matter." He crossed to her, gripping her shoulders. "What matters is he's coming. He'll be at the autumn assembly, and he's telling everyone he's here to claim his betrothed." "I'm not his betrothed. He's invented a contract, forged your father's signature, or he's presenting it as legal and binding." Stellan's gray eyes burned. "He's forcing a confrontation, in public, where he thinks I can't touch him. Then we don't go. We leave. Find somewhere else. Running won't work. He'll follow. He'll always follow." Stellan's grip tightened. "No. We face him. At the assembly. Together." "And do what?" "He has a forged contract. He has influence. I have proof of his crimes. Enough to destroy him." Stellan's voice dropped. "But I need you there. I need you to stand with me. Can you do that?" 10 days ago, she dismissed him, told him she wanted nothing to do with his schemes. Now she was being asked to walk into battle at his side. "If I do this," she said slowly, "if I stand with you against Ashworth, there's no going back. Whatever happens, why, I'll be part of it forever." "Yes. And you're asking anyway." His expression softened, just slightly, the mask cracking to reveal something vulnerable beneath. "I'm asking because I can't do it without you. Because you are the only person who makes me believe I can win." His thumb traced her shoulder through the silk. "Because somewhere between the darkness and the daylight, you became more than a mission, Meridia. You became everything." The words hung between them, heavy with implication. Before she could respond, before she could even process, he released her and stepped back. "The assembly is in 10 days, he said, his voice steady once more. "We have work to do, starting tomorrow." He strode from the library, leaving Meridia standing alone in her beautiful gown, her heart racing, her world transformed. 10 days to prepare for war, 10 days to decide what she truly wanted, and the terrifying certainty that whatever happened at the assembly would change everything. The training began the next morning. Not sword fighting or self-defense, though Stellan offered both. Instead, he taught her something far more dangerous: the art of social warfare. "Ashworth will try to isolate you," he said, pacing the library, while Meridia sat in a leather chair, taking mental notes. "He'll approach when you're alone. He'll use charm first, then threats. He'll try to make you doubt everything, including your own memory of what he's done." "I remember perfectly well what he's done." "Good. Hold on to that. He's skilled at manipulation. He convinced half of London that Alden's death was a tragic accident rather than the result of systematic destruction. They spent hours reviewing strategy, how to deflect questions, how to maintain composure under attack, how to signal for help without appearing to need it. It was exhausting. It was necessary. And through it all, Stellan maintained careful distance. Until the fourth evening, Meridia couldn't sleep. The weight of what was coming pressed down on her chest, making rest impossible. She wandered the darkened corridors of Ashford Manor, her candle casting dancing shadows on ancestral portraits. She found herself at the door to his study. The real one, not the hidden obsession room. Light flickered beneath the frame. She knocked before she could change her mind. Enter. He sat behind a massive desk, surrounded by papers, a glass of whiskey at his elbow. He'd removed his coat and cravat, his shirt open at the collar. It was the most informal she'd ever seen him. "Can't sleep?" he asked, setting down his pen. "Too much thinking." "I know the feeling." He gestured to the chair across from his desk. "Join me. Misery loves company." She sat, tucking her feet beneath her, her borrowed robe pooling around her. Improper. Intimate. Neither of them mentioned it. "What are you working on?" she asked. "Final preparations. Witness testimony. Financial records. Enough to present to the magistrate after the assembly." His jaw tightened. "If everything goes according to plan, Ashworth will be in custody by midnight. And if it doesn't? Then I'll find another way." His gray eyes met hers. "I won't let him touch you, Meridia. Whatever it takes." The intensity in his voice made her breath catch. "Why me?" The question she'd been avoiding for days. "Your grandmother said you chose me specifically, out of everyone Ashworth has threatened." Stellan was quiet for a long moment, staring into his whiskey. "The first time I saw you was in March," he said finally. "Your brother had sent a miniature portrait. A precaution, he said, so I'd recognize you if needed." He reached into his desk drawer and withdrew a small oval frame. "I've carried it ever since." Meridia took the portrait with trembling fingers. It showed her as she'd been a year ago, before Ashworth, before fear had taken residence behind her eyes. She looked young, hopeful, naive. "Why?" she whispered. "Because something in your eyes reminded me of Alden. That same spark. So that same vulnerability masked by bravado." He leaned forward, his voice roughening. "I told myself it was about revenge, about stopping Ashworth from claiming another victim. But that was a lie I told myself to avoid the truth. Which is that I wanted to know you, not protect you. Know you." His hand reached across the desk, hovering near hers without touching. "Every letter your brother sent contained details about your life, your love of philosophy, your terrible chess games, the way you argued with street vendors over a halfpenny. I found myself looking forward to those letters, reading them multiple times, memorizing details I had no business memorizing." Meridia's heart pounded. "That's obsessive, inappropriate, possibly unhinged?" A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "Yes, all of those things. Come, I'm aware. I was going to say unexpected. Is it?" He finally let his fingers brush hers, the lightest touch, electric and devastating. "You're the first thing I've wanted since Alden died. The first thing that's made me feel anything other than guilt and rage. Is it so unexpected that I'd cling to that?" She should pull away, maintain boundaries, remember that this was temporary. Instead, she turned her hand over, letting their palms meet. "I found myself thinking about you," she admitted. "In the darkness, when you were holding me. I knew I shouldn't. You were my employee, a stranger. But I felt safe, seen." The word came out barely above a whisper. "Like you were paying attention. Not to my dowry, or my connections, or my potential usefulness. Just to me, his fingers interlaced with hers. "I've spent months learning everything about you," he said. "Your favorite books, your morning rituals, the way you tap your fingers when you're thinking. But none of it prepared me for the reality." His thumb traced circles on her palm. "You're braver than your brother's letter suggested. Sharper, more stubborn, infinitely more beautiful. Stellan, I know this is complicated. I know I deceived you. I know you have every reason to walk away when this is over." He lifted their joined hands, pressing his lips to her knuckles. "But I need you to know that whatever happens at the assembly, whatever happens after, this is real. You are real, and I would burn down everything I've built to keep you safe." The candle flickered, casting shadows across his face. In the dim light, he looked younger, more vulnerable. The Duke stripped away, leaving only the man. Meridia leaned forward across the desk. "What if I don't want you to burn anything down?" she murmured. "What if I just want you to stop hiding?" "What do you want me to show you?" "Everything. The man behind the title, the grief you're drowning in, the fear you won't admit to. All of it." His breath caught. For a moment, his mask slipped entirely, and she saw it all. The devastation, the loneliness, the desperate hope he'd been trying to suppress. Then he rose, circling the desk, pulling her to her feet. "If I show you everything," he said, his voice rough, "you might not like what you see. Let me decide that for myself." He reached into his coat pocket and withdrew something small, a signet ring, the one he'd hidden beneath his glove for weeks. "This was Alden's," he said, pressing it into her palm. "He gave it to me the night he died, his final gift to the brother who failed him." Meridia looked down at the ring. Gold, worn smooth by years of wear, engraved with a crest she didn't recognize. "You didn't fail him. I wasn't there when he needed me. You're here now." She closed her fingers around the ring, then pressed it back into his hand. "You're here, and you're not going to fail me." Something broke in his expression, the last wall crumbling. Meridia, her name on his lips like a prayer. He didn't kiss her. Not yet. But he pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her, holding her against his chest like she was the only solid thing in a world that kept shifting. And for the first time in months, he let himself breathe. The assembly hall blazed with candlelight. Meridia descended the stairs on Stellan's arm, acutely aware of every eye turning toward them. She wore the garnet gown Cressida had chosen, its deep color catching the light like liquid fire. Her hair was pinned with rubies borrowed from the Ashford collection. She looked like someone who belonged on a duke's arm. She felt like a fraud. "Steady," Stellan murmured, his hand covering hers. "They're curious, not hostile." "Yet." His lips twitched. "Yet." The assembly was held at Lord Thornbury's estate, a sprawling manor house that nonetheless felt cramped with the number of guests present. Everyone who mattered in 3 counties had come, drawn by gossip and anticipation. Cressida had arrived earlier, spreading strategic whispers. Meridia Wyndham, a dear friend from London, a connection from the season, staying at Ashford Manor while recovering from an unfortunate carriage accident. Not a word about bodyguards or hunting parties or forged contracts. The first hour passed in a blur of introductions. Lord and Lady Thornbury, gracious and curious. The Whitmore family, exactly as Mrs. Pembroke had described. The Barrington sisters, twin pillars of passive aggression. A dozen more names and faces that Meridia committed to memory. And through it all, Stellan stayed close. Not touching her, not inappropriately attentive, but present. A solid wall of protection she could feel without seeing. It was the Thornbury daughter who first mentioned Ashworth. Miss Wyndham, have you heard? Lord Ashworth himself is expected this evening. Lady Helena Thornberry was barely 19, all golden curls and breathless excitement. They say he's come to claim his betrothed. How romantic! Meridia kept her expression pleasant. Indeed, I wasn't aware Lord Ashworth was engaged. Oh yes, to some mysterious woman. He's been devastated, apparently. She disappeared months ago, and he's been searching everywhere. Helena sighed dreamily. Such devotion. Such something, Meridia agreed. Stellan's hand found the small of her back, a subtle warning. She followed his gaze to the entrance hall. Phineas Ashworth had arrived. He was handsome. That was the first thing anyone noticed, and the thing that made him so dangerous. Golden hair, aristocratic features, a smile that could charm birds from trees. He moved through the crowd with easy confidence, shaking hands, kissing cheeks, every inch the beloved noble. Meridia's stomach turned. Breathe, Stellan said quietly. He can't touch you here. He doesn't need to touch me. He just needs to talk. As if hearing her words, see Ashworth's gaze swept the room and landed on her. His smile widened. He crossed the assembly hall with deliberate purpose, the crowd parting before him like water. By the time he reached them, a ring of spectators had formed, eager for drama. Miss Wyndham. His voice was warm, concerned, utterly convincing. My darling, thank God I've found you. Lord Ashworth. Meridia kept her voice steady. I'm afraid you've made a mistake. A mistake? His expression flickered with practiced confusion. My love, I've been searching for months. When you disappeared, I was beside myself. Your family wouldn't tell me where you'd gone. I feared the worst. There is no my love. We have no understanding. But we do. Ashworth reached into his coat and withdrew a folded document. Your father signed this contract 6 months ago. We're legally betrothed, my dear. Surely you remember. Whispers erupted around them. My father signed nothing. Meridia's voice carried across the sudden silence. That document is a forgery. A forgery? Ashworth's brow creased with wounded confusion. Darling, I know our courtship moved quickly. Perhaps the shock of commitment overwhelmed you. But running away? Hiding in another man's house? His gaze shifted to Stellan, turning cold. What lies has the Duke of Ravensholm been telling you? Stellan stepped forward, positioning himself between Meridia and Ashworth. The only lies in this room are falling from your mouth, he said, his voice lethally calm. That contract is forged. Miss Wyndham has never been your betrothed, and you know exactly why she fled London. Accusations without evidence. Ashworth spread his hands, feet appealing to the crowd. I understand your jealousy, your grace. Miss Wyndham is a beautiful woman, but using your title to steal another man's bride? I am not your bride. Meridia's voice cut through the murmurs. I never was. You pursued me against my wishes. You followed me when I asked you to stop. You made threats against my family when I refused your proposal. The crowd's whispers shifted tone. Uncertainty replaced eager curiosity. She's confused, Ashworth said smoothly. Clearly the Duke has poisoned her mind. Perhaps a physician should... Should what? Stellan's voice dropped to something dangerous. Should examine the bruises you left on her arm last spring? Should interview the servants you bribed to spy on her movements? Should review the financial records showing how you destroyed my brother? The color drained from Ashworth's face. Your brother's death was a tragedy, a gambling addiction. My brother's death was murder. Stellan stepped closer, his presence dominating the room. You targeted him deliberately. You manipulated his debts. You drove him to despair and called it weakness. His voice rose, carrying to every corner. And you've done the same to dozens of others. Young men and women, with no one to protect them. Fortunes stolen, reputations destroyed, lives ended. This is slander. Ashworth's composure cracked. I'll have you before the courts. The courts are exactly where we're going. Stellan withdrew a sheaf of papers from his coat. Witness testimony, financial records, letters in your own hand detailing your schemes. Enough evidence to see you hanged. The crowd erupted. Ashworth's eyes darted around the room, calculating, desperate. His gaze landed on Meridia with something far uglier than charm. You did this, he hissed. You poisoned him against me. You poisoned yourself. Meridia lifted her chin. I simply refused to be your next victim. For one terrible moment, she thought he might attack her. His hands clenched, his mask dissolved entirely, revealing the monster beneath. Then Lord Thornbury stepped forward, flanked by 2 footmen. Lord Ashworth, he said coldly, I believe the magistrate would like a word. Gentlemen, escort his lordship to the study. Ashworth struggled as they took his arms, his protests echoing through the hall. This isn't over. Ravensholm, this isn't over. You'll pay for this. Both of you. The doors closed behind him. I'm cutting off his threats. Silence fell. Then Stellan turned to face the assembled guests. I apologize for the disturbance, he said, his voice returning to its usual measured calm. I believe the orchestra was about to play a waltz. As if on cue, music swelled from the gallery. Slowly, hesitantly, couples began moving toward the dance floor. Stellan offered Meridia his hand. Dance with me, he said quietly. Show them nothing has changed. She took his hand, and he led her onto the floor. The waltz was slow and intimate, their bodies closer than propriety allowed. Meridia could feel his heart beating beneath her palm, steady and strong. You did it, she whispered. We did it. His arm tightened around her waist. You stood there and faced him. You didn't flinch. I wanted to. I wanted to run. But you didn't. His gray eyes burned into hers. You're the bravest woman I've ever known. They turned across the floor, and Meridia saw faces watching them. Some shocked, some impressed. Lady Thornbury wiping tears from her eyes. Cressida beaming like Christmas had come early. Everyone is staring, Meridia murmured. Let them. His voice dropped. Let them see what courage looks like. Let them see what I see when I look at you. What do you see? Everything. He pulled her fractionally closer, his lips nearly brushing her ear. Everything I never knew I wanted. The waltz ended. They stood frozen in the center of the dance floor, the world falling away around them. Then someone cleared their throat, and reality crashed back. Your Grace. It was Lord Thornbury, his expression grave. The magistrate has questions. Ashworth is claiming this is all a conspiracy. Stellan nodded, releasing Meridia with obvious reluctance. Stay with Cressida, he told her. I'll return as soon as I can. He strode away, and Meridia watched him go, her heart full of things she couldn't yet name. The victory was theirs. So why did she feel like something was about to go terribly wrong? The carriage ride back to Ashford Manor was quiet. Stellan had been with the magistrate for 2 hours, answering questions, presenting evidence, ensuring Ashworth would face proper justice. By the time he returned to the assembly, Meridia was exhausted, running on fumes and adrenaline. Cressida had fallen asleep against the carriage window, her face peaceful in the moonlight. The dowager had stayed home, too frail for public appearances, but undoubtedly waiting for news. Stellan sat across from Meridia, watching her with an intensity that made her skin warm. You should sleep, he said quietly. It's been a long night. I can't. My mind won't stop. Mine either. The carriage rocked gently, and their knees brushed. Neither pulled away. What happens now? Meridia asked. To Ashworth. Trial. Prison if justice prevails. The evidence is overwhelming. His jaw tightened. It won't bring Alden back, but it will stop him from hurting anyone else. And to us? The question hung in the air, heavy with implication. What do you want to happen? Meridia looked at him, this complicated man who'd lied to her and saved her and held her in darkness. I don't know, she admitted. A week ago I wanted to escape, to survive. Now I want things I shouldn't want. His breath caught. No, such as? More nights in your library. More conversations that last until dawn. More. She stopped, suddenly afraid of her own honesty. More. You. I want more of you. The carriage seemed to shrink around them. Cressida slept on, oblivious, but the world had narrowed to just the two of them. Stellan moved, crossing the small space to sit beside her, his thigh pressed against hers, warm and solid through layers of fabric. I should maintain proper distance, he said, his voice rough. You're a guest in my home, unprotected. I have every advantage. Do you feel like you have the advantage? No. He turned to face her, one hand rising to cup her cheek. I feel like I'm standing at the edge of a cliff, terrified of falling. Then fall. His mouth found hers. The kiss was nothing like she'd imagined. It was better. His lips moved against hers with desperate gentleness, like she was something precious he was afraid to break. One hand stayed at her cheek, while the other wrapped around her waist, pulling her closer. She responded with equal fervor, her fingers tangling in his hair, her body arching toward his. Months of tension, weeks of longing, all of it pouring into this single moment of connection. He tasted like champagne and desperation. He kissed like a man who'd forgotten how to breathe and had suddenly remembered why breathing mattered. When they finally broke apart, both gasping, his forehead rested against hers. Meridia. Her name on his lips, reverent and raw. I know. She kissed him again, softer this time. I know. This changes everything. Yes. If we continue down this path. He pulled back slightly, his eyes searching hers. I won't be able to let you go. When this is over, when Ashworth is dealt with, I won't be able to watch you walk away. Then don't. You deserve better than a broken duke drowning in guilt. I deserve to choose for myself. She cradled his face in her hands. I choose you. Broken parts and all. He kissed her again, deeper this time, and she felt something shift between them. Not just desire. Something more terrifying. Something that felt like forever. The carriage turned onto the Ashford Estate Drive. They separated reluctantly, straightening clothes and composing faces. Cressida stirred, yawning. Did I miss anything? She mumbled. Nothing important, Meridia said, though her swollen lips and racing heart told a different story. The carriage stopped. Footmen appeared. The evening was over. But as they climbed the manor steps, Stellan's hand found hers in the darkness, squeezing once before releasing. Tomorrow, he murmured. We need to talk. About the future. Tomorrow, she agreed. She floated to her chamber on clouds, her lips still tingling, her heart full of dangerous hope. Tomorrow they would discuss the future. Tomorrow everything would be clear. She fell asleep smiling, dreaming of libraries and waltzes, and a life she'd never dared imagine. She didn't know that morning would bring destruction. Morning came with shouting. Meridia jolted awake to raised voices echoing through the manor. She threw on a robe and rushed into the corridor, nearly colliding with Bertie. What's happening? I don't know, miss. Something about Lord Ashworth. He's escaped. Escaped. She ran. The commotion centered on Stellan's study, where he stood surrounded by servants and local constables. His face was gray, his expression devastated. "What happened?" Meridia demanded, pushing through the crowd. He had help. Stellan's voice was hollow. "Someone in the magistrate's household. He's gone. Disappeared into the night with enough money to flee the country." "But the evidence is useless if we can't put him on trial." He slammed his fist against the desk. Months of work, years of planning, all of it for nothing. The constables departed, promising searches and investigations that everyone knew would yield nothing. Ashworth had money, connections, intelligence. If he wanted to disappear, he would. Meridia moved to Stellan's side, reaching for his hand. "We'll find another way. There is no other way." He pulled back, and the rejection stung like a slap. "I had one chance, one moment to bring him justice, and I failed. You didn't fail. The system failed. The corruption. I should have anticipated this." He paced the study like a caged animal. "I knew he had allies. I knew he was dangerous. But I was so focused on the assembly, on the public confrontation, on—" He stopped, looking at her with something terrible in his eyes. "On you. I was distracted by you." The words landed like physical blows. "That's not fair," she whispered. "Isn't it?" His voice rose. "For months I was single-minded, obsessed. Nothing mattered but destroying Ashworth. Then you arrived, and suddenly I was thinking about library conversations and dancing and—" He broke off, running his hands through his hair. "Alden is unavenged because I couldn't stay focused." "Stellan, that's not— You should go." Meridia went cold. "What?" "Go. Leave Ashford Manor. Ashworth has fled. You're no longer in danger." His face hardened into the mask she'd first seen at the coaching inn. The bodyguard, not the man. "There's no reason for you to stay." "No reason?" Her voice cracked. "After last night? After everything you said?" "Last night was a mistake. I lost sight of what matters." He wouldn't meet her eyes. "My brother is dead. The man who killed him is free. And I spent the night kissing you in a carriage instead of ensuring justice was served. You can't blame yourself for what happened. You can't blame us." "I can. I do." He finally looked at her, and his eyes were empty. The man from the library, the man who'd held her and kissed her and spoken of falling, was gone. In his place was a stranger. "I'll have a carriage prepared. You can be in London by tomorrow." "London? I can't go to London. My home isn't safe." "Then I'll arrange lodging elsewhere, somewhere far from here." His jaw tightened. "Somewhere far from me." Tears burned in Meridia's eyes. "Is this what you want? To push me away? To drown in guilt alone? What I want doesn't matter. It never did." He turned away, dismissing her. "Goodbye, Miss Wyndham. I hope you find the life you deserve." Miss Wyndham, not Meridia. Not anymore. She stood frozen, watching him retreat behind walls she'd thought she'd broken down. The intimacy of the previous night felt like a fever dream, something imagined rather than lived. "Fine." Her voice came out cold, matching his. "If that's what you want." "It is." "Then I'll go. But know this. Stellan Ashford." She waited until he turned to face her. "You're not honoring your brother by destroying yourself. You're just giving Ashworth another victory." She walked out before he could respond. Cressida found her packing. "What are you doing? What happened?" The younger woman's face crumpled when she saw Meridia's tears. No, you can't leave. Not now. Not after." "Your brother has made his feelings clear." "My brother is an idiot who doesn't know how to handle feelings at all." Cressida grabbed her arm. "He's scared. Ashworth's escape has broken something in him. But that doesn't mean—" "It means exactly what he said it means. I'm a distraction. A mistake." Meridia's voice shattered. "He looked at me like I was nothing, like last night never happened. He's lying. He has to be lying. Maybe." but I can't force him to want me to stay. The carriage was ready within the hour. Mrs. Pembroke pressed food into her hands. Bertie cried quietly. Even the dowager sent word from her sickbed. Tell her I understand, and tell my grandson he's a fool. Stellan did not appear. As the carriage pulled away from Ashford Manor, Meridia watched the golden stone facade grow smaller through the window. The gardens she'd walked, the library she'd haunted, the chamber where she'd felt, for one brief moment, like she belonged. Gone now. All of it. She'd come here a woman fleeing danger. She was leaving a woman fleeing heartbreak. And somewhere out there, Phineas Ashworth was free, and the man she loved was drowning in guilt that would consume him whole. Meridia closed her eyes and let the tears fall. 3 days passed. Not 3 days of lodging in a modest inn outside of Manchester, paid for by Ashford money that felt like charity. 3 days of staring at walls and barely eating and replaying every moment in her mind. She should hate him. He'd dismissed her like a servant, blamed her for his own distractions, thrown away everything they'd built in one moment of grief-fueled cruelty. But she couldn't hate him. She could only ache. On the 4th morning, a carriage arrived. Cressida burst through the inn's door like a force of nature, her traveling clothes disheveled and her face frantic. You have to come back, now, immediately. Meridia set down her tea with deliberate calm. I don't have to do anything. Grandmother is dying. The doctors say tonight. Tomorrow at the latest. And Stellan. Cressida's voice broke. He's destroyed himself. He hasn't eaten since you left. Hasn't slept. He sits in that study with Alden's portrait and drinks until he passes out. Mrs. Pembroke says he's given up entirely. The words hit like punches. That's not my problem. He made his choice. He made a terrible choice because he was terrified. Cressida grabbed her hands. I found the letters he wrote you. 3 of them. All starting with apologies and ending with declarations. None of them sent, because he's convinced he doesn't deserve you. He convinced me of that rather thoroughly. He was wrong. He knows he was wrong. But he's too proud and too broken to fix it himself. Cressida's eyes filled with tears. Please, Meridia, if not for him, then for grandmother. She's asking for you. She wants to see you before she goes. The dowager, the fierce old woman who'd threatened to haunt her and then given her blessing in the same breath. Dying. Tonight or tomorrow. Meridia closed her eyes, fighting the war inside herself. Pride versus compassion. Self-preservation versus love. Love. Because that's what it was, wasn't it? Despite everything, despite the hurt and the rejection, she loved him. She'd known it in the darkness of that hidden compartment. She'd felt it solidify in his library, in his arms, in that stolen kiss. You couldn't unlove someone in 3 days. You couldn't unlove someone at all. If I come back, she said slowly, and he pushes me away again. He won't. I know my brother. He was dying without you. He just needed time to realize it. Meridia thought of her mother's letters, full of quiet wisdom. Thought of her father, who'd once told her that bravery wasn't the absence of fear, but action in spite of it. Running doesn't make the wanting go away. Let me get my things, she said. The journey back to Ashford Manor took 6 hours. 6 hours of uncertainty, of rehearsing speeches, of preparing for the worst while hoping for something better. The house felt different when they arrived, quieter, heavier. Grief had already begun settling into the walls. Mrs. Pembroke met them at the door. Thank God, she breathed. The dowager is asking for you, Miss Wyndham. She's lucid, but barely. The doctors say it won't be long. And His Grace? In his study. Same as he's been for days. The housekeeper's expression tightened. We've tried everything. He won't listen. Meridia nodded, squaring her shoulders. Take me to the Dowager first." The old woman looked smaller than Meridia remembered, fragile in a way she hadn't been just days ago. But her eyes still held that sharp awareness as they focused on Meridia's face. "You came back," the Dowager whispered. Cressida was persuasive. "Cressida is many things. Subtle isn't one of them. A ghost of a smile. But she was right to bring you. He needs you." He pushed me away. Fear makes fools of us all, especially the Ashford men. The Dowager's hand, thin and trembling, reached for hers. "I told you once that he was broken, that he needed someone to see him. Did you?" I tried. "Try again. Try until it works." Her grip tightened with surprising strength. "I'm dying, girl. Hours now, not days. And my only wish, my only prayer, is that he finds his way back to the living before it's too late." Tears streamed down Meridia's face. "I don't know if I can save him." "You already have. He just hasn't realized it yet." The Dowager's eyes fluttered closed. "Go to him. Now. While there's still time." Meridia pressed a kiss to the old woman's forehead and left. She found Stellan exactly where Mrs. Pembroke had described. Slumped in his chair, a glass dangling from his fingers, Alden's portrait staring down from the wall. He looked like death warmed over, unshaven, hollow-eyed, clothes wrinkled as if he'd slept in them for days. "You came back." His voice was hoarse, broken. "Your grandmother is dying." "I know." He didn't look at her. "I've been sitting with her when I can bear it, which isn't often. She wants you to live. Living requires wanting to live. I'm not sure I remember how." Meridia crossed the room and knocked the glass from his hand. It shattered against the floor, whiskey spreading like blood. Stellan stared at her, shocked. "Get up," she said. "Meridia, get up! Stand on your feet, look at me!" Something in her voice reached him. He rose, swaying slightly, his gray eyes meeting hers for the first time. "You pushed me away," she said, her voice trembling but strong. "You called me a distraction, a mistake. You dismissed me like I was nothing. I know, I'm sorry, I was afraid, grieving, desperate." She stepped closer. "I understand. But you don't get to destroy yourself because you're hurting. You don't get to abandon the people who love you because loving feels too dangerous. I don't deserve." "Stop." She grabbed his face in her hands, forcing him to look at her. "Stop deciding what you deserve. Stop punishing yourself for being human. Your brother died. It was a tragedy. But killing yourself slowly won't bring him back. It will just make his death mean nothing. You don't understand. I understand that I love you." The words burst out, raw and terrified. "I love you, Stellan Ashford. Not the Duke, not the Avenger. You, the man who held me in darkness, the man who gave me his brother's ring to hold, the man who kissed me in a carriage and made me believe in futures I'd given up imagining." His breath caught. "I love you," she repeated. "And I'm not going to let you down. Not without a fight." He stared at her, and she watched the walls crumble. Then he was kissing her, desperate and broken and alive. His arms wrapped around her like she was the only solid thing in a world that kept dissolving. Salt tears mixed between their lips, his or hers. She couldn't tell. "I love you," he gasped against her mouth. "I've loved you since March, since a portrait that couldn't capture you. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I'll spend the rest of my life making it up to you if you'll let me." "Then start now." She pulled back, cupping his face. "Go to your grandmother. Say goodbye properly. Be present for what time she has left." His face crumpled. "I can't. If I sit with her, if I watch her go, then we'll sit together. You won't be alone." She took his hand. "I promise, Stellan. Whatever comes next, you won't be alone." He gripped her fingers like a lifeline. and together they walked toward the dying and the dawn. The Dowager Duchess of Ravensholm died at sunrise. Stellan held her hand as she passed, Meridia at his side, Cressida weeping quietly in the corner. The old woman's final breath was peaceful, her expression serene, as if death had arrived as an old friend rather than an enemy. "She's gone," Stellan whispered. Meridia squeezed his shoulder, saying nothing. There were no words for this, only presence, only the simple truth that he wasn't facing it alone. The days that followed were a blur of funeral arrangements and condolence calls, black crepe and solemn prayers. The county came to pay respects, Lord Thornbury and Lady Whitmore and dozens of others, whose names Meridia barely registered. Through it all, Stellan leaned on her. Not literally, though sometimes that too, but emotionally, constantly, the way a man learns to rely on someone after years of relying on no one. They walked the gardens in the gray autumn light, and he talked about his grandmother, her fierceness, her expectations, the way she'd pushed him relentlessly because she believed in his potential. "She would have liked you," he said one afternoon. "Properly liked you, I mean. Not just because you were useful. She threatened to haunt me from beyond the grave. That's how she showed affection." Meridia laughed, and Stellan smiled, and for a moment, grief lifted just enough to let light through. A fortnight after the funeral, news arrived about Ashworth. He'd been found in France, attempting to board a ship to America. British authorities had intercepted him, extradition papers already filed. The trial would proceed. "It's over," Stellan said, staring at the letter. "Finally over. How do you feel?" "I don't know." He set the letter down. "Empty, maybe. I thought I'd feel triumphant. But mostly I just feel tired. Revenge is like that. It promises satisfaction but delivers exhaustion." "When did you become so wise?" "I've been reading your father's philosophy collection." He laughed, really laughed, and pulled her into his arms. "Stay," he murmured against her hair. "I'm already staying." "No, I mean stay. Forever. Marry me." Meridia went still. "Stellan, I know it's too soon. I know we've barely known each other 2 months. I know there are 1,000 reasons it's impractical." He pulled back, his gray eyes burning with intensity. "But I also know that I want to wake up beside you every morning. I want to argue about philosophy and dance badly at assemblies, and raise children who have your stubbornness and my terrible timing. I want a life, Meridia, a real life, and I want it with you." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "What about society? I'm a gentleman's daughter with no fortune. The ton will talk. Let them talk. I'm a duke. They'll learn to accept what I choose. Your grandmother wanted you to marry well. My grandmother wanted me to live, to be happy." He cupped her face in his hands. "You make me happy. You make me want to be better than I am. If that's not marrying well, I don't know what is." Meridia looked at this man who'd been her bodyguard, and her betrayer, and her champion, who'd held her in darkness and pushed her away in fear, and fought his way back to her through grief and guilt. She thought of her mother, who'd married for love and never regretted it. Her father, who'd lost everything except the family that mattered. She thought of futures she'd never dared imagine. "So she whispered. "Yes, yes, 1,000 times, yes." He kissed her, soft and fierce and full of promise. When they finally broke apart, both laughing and crying, Cressida was standing in the doorway, practically bouncing. "I knew it!" she shrieked, flying across the room to embrace them both. "I knew it, from the moment she yelled at you in the coaching inn. Welcome to the family, sister." The wedding took place 3 months later, on the first clear day of spring. It was small by ducal standards, barely 100 guests, held in the Ashford Manor Chapel, where generations of Ashfords had married before them. Meridia wore cream silk with pearls from the family collection, her dark hair crowned with spring flowers. Stellan wore his finest coat, and an expression of such transparent joy that even Lady Thornbury wept. Cressida stood as attendant, unable to contain her grinning. Mrs. Pembroke supervised the servants with suspicious moisture in her eyes. Even Bertie cried openly into her handkerchief. The vicar spoke of love and commitment, of two souls becoming one. But when Stellan slipped the ring onto Meridia's finger, the ring that had once been Alden's, he spoke words meant only for her. "You saved me," he murmured, "when I didn't know I needed saving." "We saved each other," she whispered back. "That's what love does." The kiss that sealed their marriage was not chaste. The congregation erupted in applause and knowing laughter, and Stellan grinned against her lips without pulling away. The reception spilled across Ashford Manor's grounds, music and dancing, and more food than could possibly be consumed. Meridia's family had come up from London, her mother crying happy tears, her father looking proud and slightly overwhelmed, her brother Cedric surprisingly well behaved. Cedric had sent his blessing from abroad weeks earlier, along with a letter for Stellan. "Take care of her, or I'll have to come back and kill you myself." It was signed with the postscript, "I'm joking." Mostly. As evening fell and guests began departing, Stellan led Meridia away from the festivities, toward the East Garden, where the first stars were emerging. "I have something for you," he said, reaching into his coat. "Another gift? You've already given me enough. This is different." He withdrew a small leather journal, worn with age. "I found it in my grandmother's things. She meant for you to have it after she passed." Meridia opened the journal. The pages were filled with elegant handwriting, outdated entries spanning decades. "It's her diary?" "One of them. Specifically, the one covering the year she married my grandfather." Stellan's voice softened. "She was like you know. A gentleman's daughter, without fortune or connections. Society thought the match was madness. They were happy for 43 years. Meridia traced the faded words, reading fragments. "They say I'm not worthy of him. Perhaps they're right. But he chooses me anyway, and that choice is worth more than their approval." "She wanted you to know," Stellan said, "that happy endings aren't reserved for the worthy. They're claimed by the brave." Meridia closed the journal, pressing it against her heart. "I love you," she said. "I don't say it enough. You say it constantly. In every look, every touch, every time you refuse to let me retreat into guilt." He pulled her close. "I hear it, Meridia. I promise you, I hear it." They stood together as darkness fell, the Duchess and her Duke, the woman who'd hired a bodyguard, and the man who'd been so much more. Above them, stars emerged like promises. 1 year later, on the anniversary of their first meeting, Stellan surprised Meridia with an evening journey. "Where are we going?" she asked, as the carriage wound through unfamiliar roads. "You'll see." They arrived at a modest farmhouse, unremarkable except for the way Meridia's breath caught when she recognized it. "This is where we hid," she whispered, "during the attack." "I bought it last month." Stellan helped her down from the carriage. "I couldn't bear the thought of someone else owning the place where I first realized I would do anything to keep you safe." They walked inside together, to the kitchen, where the trapdoor still lay hidden beneath worn floorboards. Stellan knelt and opened it, revealing the cramped space where they'd pressed together in darkness, where she'd felt his heartbeat against her spine, and known, somehow, that everything was about to change. "It's smaller than I remember," Meridia said. "Fear does that. Makes everything larger." He pulled her close. "But you fit perfectly. Right here, in my arms. You always have." She leaned against him, feeling his warmth, his strength, the steady drum of his heart. "I woke up pressed against a man I'd hired to protect me," she murmured. "A stranger in the dark. And what happened then? Everything." She tilted her face up to meet his eyes. "Everything happened then." He kissed her, slow and sweet, and Meridia felt the last year collapse into this single moment. The fear, the grief, the anger, the love, all of it leading here, to this humble farmhouse, to this man who'd changed everything. When they finally broke apart, she rested her head against his chest. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what? For finding me, for protecting me, for being stubborn enough to fight through your own grief and reach for something better." "You're the one who fought," he said. "I just followed." She smiled against his coat. "Then we're even." Outside, the moon rose over fields that stretched toward forever, and somewhere in the darkness, in a hidden compartment beneath farmhouse floorboards, the ghosts of two strangers smiled at the future they'd built together. "Thank you for being here. You are the reason these stories exist, because you believe in love that chooses courage over convenience, in characters who fight for happiness despite the odds, in endings that feel earned and true. Your presence makes this space warm and welcoming, and I'm grateful for every moment you spend with these characters." Do you have a favorite line or scene? Your engagement helps me understand what moves you, what keeps you listening, and what kinds of stories to create next. Consider subscribing if you'd like more romances with emotional depth and genuine character growth. Hit that notification bell so you never miss a new story. Until next time, remember, the best love stories don't happen to people who play it safe. They happen to people brave enough to fall. Thank you for being here. You make this community what it is,